Well, hello there. Who are you?
This is the Zodiac speaking.
Killing must feel good to God, too. He does it all the time. And are we not created in his image?
We all go a little mad sometimes.
After all, murder is, or should be, an art.
I could kill you now pretty easily. Do some interesting things before anyone showed up.
What are these films you can't wait to look at?
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast and the 23rd episode in our series dedicated to on-screen serial killers of horror film and TV history. I'm your podcast host, Anna Bogutska, and I too am bad at parties when I start talking about nihilist philosophy. Continuing on our serial killer chasing detective beat, this episode is dedicated to two bad men who keep worse men at bay. Podcaster Steph McKenna joins me to discuss the first season of True Detective, which aired 10 years ago in 2014 and inspired countless breathless video essays and a big bump in book sales for Thomas Ligotti. Written by Nick Pizzolatto, the show follows detectives Marty Hart and Russ Cole, played by Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey respectively, as they uncover the killer and conspiracy behind a string of grotesque murders that happened in the 90s. Set across three timelines, True Detective blends procedural with cosmic horror, detective work, with the futility of existence. It's dense in atmosphere and dripping with literary references. Basically, it is exactly my jam. This episode contains spoilers for the first season only. We don't touch on the subsequent seasons at all, but if you enjoyed or not True Detective Night Country, you might want to hear my standalone episode on that. I'll link to it in the show notes. And as always, but particularly with this episode, as the show deals with dark subject matters such as child abuse and suicide, listener discretion is advised. And if you want to skip this one, that's a-okay. If you have deep thoughts about Rusty, Marty, or time being a flat circle, my DMs are open. And if you enjoy this episode, this series, or this podcast, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also go to Patreon and support the Final Girls there. And with all that said, please enjoy our take on True Detective. I think with this particular episode, it is a possibility that both or one of us might have existential breakdown over the course of the next hour or so.
Yeah. If I start screaming, you know why. I've just suddenly come to a realization about the futility of my own existence.
You know what? That is the price we pay for podcasting about True Detective.
For some great TV, it's the price we pay.
So, Steph, we'll try to keep it cheery, but we are not going to promise that. Before we get into our favorite existential detectives, I wanted to ask you, and it's a question I'm asking everyone on this series, what do you think when you think of a movie serial killer?
My first thought, or like my go-to image of a movie serial killer, I think is defined by like the psychological thrillers of the 90s and in the early 2000s. So very much, I think that very much correlates with my age and a time frame when I was getting into horror movies and sort of darker storytelling and, you know, recording them on VHS from the TV and stuff like that. So obviously definitive films like Seven and Silence of the Lambs, and, you know, you say the word serial killer in the context of TV and film, and I think of quite an Americanized or like Hollywood figure, like predominantly white men who live double lives, who often blend into the everyday, either because they have like no unusual lifestyle because they're sort of, you know, largely unseen or unimportant in society, you know, average like Patrick Bateman suited guy, or, you know, sort of working class, blue collar, sort of Christian, that kind of thing. There's definitely what I think of there. And I think of violence enacted against women and children in particular, and sadism and control. And I think of I think of rules and formulas and that kind of detail and methodology and symbolism. So yeah, I think a lot of my understanding of a serial killer on screen for a long time, especially as a younger viewer, which definitely expanded as I, got older, but it was definitely sort of, shaped by some of the early films that I saw, which, some of them aren't even, some of them are great, but even things like California or Kiss the Girls, they were all like, real, or sort of later films like Frailty and Zodiac. Like those are the films and the sort of the kind of figures that I first think of when you say serial killer. And then of course now I think of television like Mindhunter and True Detective and Hannibal. So that's a long way of saying that my go-to is an angry white man with some sort of like insane symbolism or philosophy behind his violence, which probably suits today's topic quite well.
It probably does. And I love that you kind of immediately went for the 90s, because I do think, and it's come up a couple of times as I've recorded the series, in the 90s, particularly in the mid 90s, there was like a little cottage industry of very similar looking and similar feeling psychological thriller / horror films that dealt with serial killers and the detectives that pursued them, the chase, the puzzle, the violence. They all kind of had a certain flavor. A lot of it, after Seven came out, were Seven Lights.
Yes. Just attempting to recapture that as a
100%, and very blatantly so. And some of them, to be honest, like I find still deeply enjoyable. I'll still watch Kiss the Girls and be like, you know what? That's a good time at the movies.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes I have them in my head as like, I remember watching like Along Came a Spider and being like, this is a brilliant film, and then putting it on and being like, maybe it doesn't matter though. I'm still having a good time. Like,
and they're always popping up on the streaming services as, one company buys a catalog of of another, and then you'll be like, oh, when did this Robert Downey Jr. Serial killer movie come out? Oh, Neil Jordan directed it? When did that happen?
Play,
Immediate hit play.
It's just such a... I feel like I'm always in the mood for that kind of film, though.
Always. I'm always in the mood for a mid-90s psychological thriller about a serial killer, and I'm always in the mood for a courtroom drama. Those are my two flavors of every month.
Absolutely. Yes.
But always. I love what you mentioned, and it's a perfect segue, thank you for that, into our conversation on this episode, that now you tend to think of TV shows like True Detective, like Mindhunter. That kind of sets me up nicely to ask you about your relationship with True Detective as a show. Now it's grown into something much larger. We're going to focus exclusively on the first season. But did you watch it when it came out in 2014? Did you stick with it as it evolved?
Yeah, I mean, I was a huge fan of season 1 when it came out. I watched it in real time as it aired in the UK. And it was such like an important and memorable and shocking and exhilarating TV experience for me. Like, it had like the writing and the performances, the structure, the cinematography, like even the opening credits were kind of elevated beyond so much of the television I'd seen before. It really felt like the quality kind of leapt off the charts. And it's a season that I've gone back to rewatch several times. It's kind of up there, like with Twin Peaks and The Sopranos, and Succession is one of my, kind of in a muddled top 5, I guess it really is. And I think, like lots of people, for better or for worse, I have watched every season since in a bid to try and recapture that initial experience again. So season 2, like a lot of people, it disappointed me. Season 3 was better, but not great. Season 4 was almost great, but still not quite season 1. So yeah, the latest season has definitely sort of resurrected my dwindling enthusiasm, which is nice. But yeah, I think I love season 1 of True Detective. I'm happy to enter into an argument that it's the best mini series of all time to date, maybe. Like nothing, I don't know if anything's beaten it for me yet. It's just an absolute game changer for how TV is sort of made and viewed, and for the subgenre too, isn't it?
I absolutely kind of, debatable whether it's the best limited series there is out there. Let's have the fight out in the DMs.
Yeah.
But I do remember, similarly to you, I'm probably in a more extreme way. I don't remember a single thing about season 2 or season 3, Steph.
Oh, no. Mahershala Ali, that's what I remember.
I know who started
Colin
it.
Farrell? Yeah,
I
that's
remember
about it.
Colin Farrell. I remember Vince Vaughn.
I remember being bored.
I remember Rachel McAdams, I think, is in one of them.
Maybe.
And I could not tell you anything about the crimes. I could not tell you anything about who did them. I could not tell you about I could not even tell you where they were set.
Did they talk about business in season 2? I feel like it felt more like I had to have some sort of grasp of
schools or something.
The economy. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of boring stuff. The economy. Yeah.
Honestly.
No.
And so none of it really came close to. And I was a fan, and I really liked and responded to what Nine Country was doing. And I did a whole other dedicated episode about it. I think I liked the open questions that it left me with.
For sure.
But True Detective season 1, I think, was just such a perfect combination of moment in time, writer, director, stars, and setting, and the vibe as well was ripe for it. We hadn't seen anything like this on TV. Also, it's around this time when big movie stars were moving to TV, to limited series, because that's where the juicy roles were.
Yeah.
It's the era of the difficult bad men of television as well, where people are like, yeah, we want to see real assholes on TV. That's what we want to see. Not their bitch wives. We don't want any of that. But we do want to see the killers and the drug dealers and the kingpins as our leading men. So I just remember being totally completely consumed by this series. In my mind, I know this was the year when I moved to London, so I must have watched it here, but in my mind I remember watching it in my previous home in Madrid. And I just remember I've always nurtured this obsession with Southern Gothic literature, with Louisiana and the Southern states in particular. I went to New Orleans for the first time the year after True Detective. I was all up in there. I was reading the books. I was on the forums. I was like,
give me a walking tour. Where can I go?
Totally. I fully bought the entire reading list.
Anna, I love this.
I was like, I had a whole wish list, being like, every single book that is referenced in True Detective, I will buy it. I will read it. I was completely into it. But I wanted to ask you kind of about this moment. You mentioned about TV. Where was TV in 2014 when this show arrived, and where was horror?
Yeah, I mean, we're 10. I can't believe we're 10 years from True Detective season 1 now. That is
madness,
insane. I don't know where the time goes. And for me, from my experience and sort of my reading of it, like, TV is such prestige now. Like, I feel we're very familiar with and come to expect sort of, a level of craftsmanship to television, of kind of big budgets and big name performances in those shows that sort of completely flood our streaming channels as well. I mean, there's so many fucking shows now. I cannot keep up with them. There is simply not enough time in our lives. And we see all these, as you'd said, these huge names from the movie business, directors to actors, like, move between sort of film and TV projects all the time now. And I feel like 10 years ago, we were in quite a different place. Like, I've been trying to work out whether this would have been my first kind of mini series outside of like a BBC series like Pride and Prejudice or Jane Eyre, like apart from sort of Band of Brothers, which I didn't watch but I was aware of. This was sort of my first significant experience of a mini series or sort of a limited series on a streaming platform. Like, I watched it, I think, through Now TV, via Sky, and Netflix had only sort of recently arrived, so we were quite new to the platform. So I was used to watching shows with multiple seasons, anything from 14 episodes up in each season. And then there was this pithy sort of 8-episode show which told a complete story, had 2 big Hollywood names. So it feels like the beginning of that kind of limited series boom for me. And I'm almost surprised now when something gets renewed for another season. Like when The Bear first, was like, oh, they're going to have a season 2. I was like, oh, I thought this was going to be a limit. Like it's kind of, we're so used to it now. And in terms of horror, I feel like horror television was sort of gaining momentum, and we had some good sort of quality big hitters under our belts, like sort of, The Walking Dead, American Horror Story, and Dexter. And we'd had Hannibal the year before, hadn't we? I think the year
Hannibal started
Detective.
in 2013 and finished 2015.
And that felt like a big game changer, especially for the genre, because it was the quality of that across the board as well, and the darkness of what we saw sort of on the screen. So those two shows are sort of standout shows for me in horror from this time. They sort of, they definitely relate to one another as well, don't they, in terms of some of those approaches. But yeah, I think for me, once True Detective aired, my expectations for TV sort of changed forever. Like I wanted more shows with that level of sort of high density storytelling from sort of I wanted beginning to end. I wanted cinematography and direction and performances sort of akin to the level that it felt like, the level I'd see at the cinema, and kind of nothing could shock me anymore as well. So that's my read on it.
I love the expression high density because I think that is perfect for the show. And, we're not expected to remember these things just off the top of my head. I was kind of having a little browse of what was on TV in 2014. And I was surprised that, True Detective sort of sits in this weird Venn diagram between prestigious television, limited series, and at the same time horror and true crime, the more salacious kind. But then what horror was doing on TV at the time was very heavily, very gothic, very supernatural, because there was Penny Dreadful, there was
of course.
The Strain, there's Guillermo del Toro's like vampire series, there was a limited series version of Rosemary's Baby.
There was
Constantine, so like superheroes were starting to get into like the horror TV space as well. The Walking Dead was obviously just going on and on and on and on.
Forever,
And at the same time, like that's 2014 is when on the big screen, heavy air quotes here, elevated horror started to make its mark. It's notably the year of The Babadook, It Follows, The Witch, Honeymoon.
That was a fucking great year for cinema, actually.
It was a great year for horror. But it almost feels like a vacuum of time, even though it is very of its time, especially because of the stars. But let's get into it and what it adds to this serial killer format and space and genre that I've been luxuriating in for the past couple of months.
Just fully immersed. Immersing yourself.
I'm having a ball.
I was going to say, who would have thought? I mean, we all know how and why we get joy from such things, but it's fun, isn't it?
Who would have thought that a show that starts off with a grisly, ritualistic murder of a young woman would bring us so much joy?
That's just as great times. It's brought us all together, hasn't it? We're on a list somewhere now. Judging by the things I've been Googling in the past week.
Yes. Where is the King in Yellow?
Yeah.
So, Seb, how does the show use the serial killer format that we know and love? And what does it bring that's fresh or that feels fresh to the space?
Yeah, I guess, it's something... The opening of this show with that kind of ritualistic murder, it's a real shocker, isn't it? It's something that feels much darker and otherworldly than sort of some of the types of crime scenes we've seen before. It feels more reminiscent of, Hannibal's TV series and of the sort of staged nature of the killings in Seven. So it uses that police procedural framework for its story, and you've got the premise of two homicide detectives on the trail of a serial killer, that cat of mouse game where they're trying to identify the killer before he or she can strike again. So it's a familiar format to a point. We meet the detectives, they talk us through the details of the scene, that familiar sort of detective jargon, and I think as a society we're sort of we're fascinated with that mythical figure of the serial killer and the sort of types of killer that we've seen before. We can immediately tell that this is the type of killer with a vision. It's got, they've got a precise method to the killing. The details are important. The layout of the scene is part of the act. And the victim is, potentially a vulnerable young woman, a sex worker. So I feel like the initial scene sort of quickly establishes these sort of key parts and, even the key symbols and the signifiers of the killer. So you've got this framework that feels quite, in a way, typical in some respects of a serial killer story that we've known and enjoyed before. But then there's so many elements of True Detective that just feel so fresh, like the atmosphere. And these are things we're going to have to dig into, but
yes.
The atmosphere of the kind of cosmic horror, that meshing of sort of grim reality and something potentially more supernatural, sort of folkloric. I thought it was funny that you and I recently discussed Longlegs together, because I thought of that film quite a lot when I was rewatching it. There's similarities to that, to the mystery behind Longlegs and the mystery of the killer here, who's sort of described as a green-eared spaghetti monster. It's narratively quite different, telling the story in an intricate way by sort of drawing on these three interweaving timelines, which sort of brings a bit of an unreliability to the narration. We get the kind of facts versus, what we're being shown versus what we're being told. So our knowledge doesn't really unfold in a linear manner about the case. We know that they've caught someone at the beginning. We know that the case potentially hasn't been solved, and we kind of work our way backwards. And then, of course, really importantly, this is a show about a serial killer, but its primary focus is on the two men investigating it. It feels like the killer and the victims often take a backseat to this really turbulent relationship, and their interactions and their personal journeys are the focus point of the show, not the mystery that we're trying to solve. So all of those points, and of course the philosophy of the show, which ties into that cosmic horror, and that sort of sense of fatalism and nihilism. It's just the whole thing is quite mind-blowing in its scope. I think there's so much going on, and so it feels like when you start, you've got these familiar beats and you feel like you've got a bit of a sense of how things are going to unfold, perhaps. But then there's just like a level of sophistication to it, which sounds like saying elevated, doesn't it? It sounds a bit, but there's an intricacy to this and a kind of, a depth to it that you don't often
It's certainly narratively intricate, and I particularly want to hear your thoughts on how it handles that. But rewatching it, it's been really interesting because I was trepidatious about my own memory of it. I remember loving it very much. I remember fully drinking the True Detective Kool-Aid 10 years ago.
Were you waiting to be disappointed?
I really was waiting to be disappointed, and I found myself completely immersed all over again, and actually very in awe of the structure of it, which I'll get to in a minute. But I think the thing that stood out to me the most, and you sort of mentioned it, was the atmosphere. I feel like I've been watching all of these films, and some of them are more intense than others. Some of them go for realism, where they're adapting real life cases. Some of them are like supernatural or more heightened. And I feel like this one sort of exists between those two extremes. But the thing that stuck out the most was the highly dense atmosphere that came through the sense of place and how it evoked the heat, the constant sun, the oppressive sort of sense of morality, and the moral hypocrisy of the powers that kind of control and also kind of contaminate this area of the world. The intense sense of poverty and deprivation and how that's filmed. And more than anything, there's like this intense pessimism, not just in Rusty's like bad charm, but rather in the way that it's filmed and the way that the shots are framed and the color of it. There's this like little to no expectation of goodness from anything.
It feels drained, doesn't it? Like it's drained of drained of life.
It feels like rotted to the core. Like sort of this entire show is the rotted core of an apple that these two detectives are sort of pushing around like a football, which is an image. But like even the way that like many other shows, including Twin Peaks, start with the naked dead body of a young woman. Ultimately, there is not that much of that, and a lot more of digging into this rotting core at the heart of this place, and how not even the quote unquote good cop, not even the quote unquote heroes of this tale are actually good people. And there's a line that they say, I think, I can't recall who it was, whether it was Rusty or Marty, but they said like, we are bad men, but we keep worse men outside the door. Mm-hmm. And I just like, I love how dark, how existentially dark that is from the very first moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so true. There are no heroes in this show. There are no good dudes, that's for sure. No good dudes.
Well, let's get into our bad dudes, Rusty Cole and Marty Hart. What do you make of them as characters? And I think this is a much more complicated question. What are they like in 1995 versus 2002 versus 2012, which are the three different timelines that interact and the three different times of their lives and their relationship where we see them?
Yeah, these intricate timelines. Yeah, the nihilist and the regular guy with a big ass dick. That's which makes me laugh every time.
Every time.
I know I shouldn't laugh, but it's, you know, it's grim, it's hateful, but also, it's these two Louisiana police detectives who are sort of placed together as partners. Is it Marty who says that you can't choose your family or your partner? Like they've got these completely, at least when we meet them, these completely different outlooks on life and sort of what they deem important or valuable. You know, everything's different. So we've got Marty, who is played by Woody Harrelson, and when we meet him in 95, he's like a cop through and through. Like, he plays the game. He believes in the game. He's the political schmoozer. He's the people pleaser. He follows cop procedure, and he plays by cop rules because they benefit him. And I think in that interview in that first episode in 2012, he calls himself, you know, he talks about himself a lot and who he is. He says he's a steady guy. Mm-hmm. He's a regular guy. He's a Christian. He's got a nice home. He's got friends at work. He tells himself he's in control, but we see over time that his words don't match his actions. And, you know, through his extramarital activities and his behavior at home and at work, we can see that he's a man that's in denial. Like, he says he knows who he is, but he's lost and he has no clue who he is. And he justifies his actions and he justifies his infidelity, which is very creepy, by the way. It's actually a really creepy guy. You know, it's decompressing for the good of the family. He's, you know, a man who's supposed to have a strong sense of faith and principle, but he's actually just like a lost child and a skeezy asshole. And then we have Rust, by comparison, who is easily one of my most favourite TV characters ever. I think
the life of the party.
Oh, God, right? The life of the party by being not the life of the party at all. He's just so powerfully played by Matthew McConaughey. And I think Marty describes him as the guy that would pick a fight with the sky if he didn't like its shade of blue. Who says these things? Honestly, I wish I came out with stuff that cool. But
the Southern charm, man.
It's just the Southern charm, isn't it? Yeah. So, and when we meet him, he's this, you know, the stoic observer. He's smart and detail driven. He's a purposeful loner. He's unpopular with his colleagues. So, and there's such a clear sort of visual contrast between them. Rusty's flat is totally sparse. You know, he's not concerned or driven in any way by what his partner finds important. He's a total nihilist, like comically so. Like those speeches he gives in the car are so profound, but also quite funny because think this is totally wild that this guy is coming out with this stuff.
He's got his extra large leather moleskin that he carries everywhere. He draws all the creepy shit he finds. Yeah,
absolutely. He's the tax man.
I love the detail of Rusty's apartment, particularly because it is bare, like you said, except for all his murder manuals.
Oh yeah.
And
the tiny mirror.
Tiny sliver of a mirror where he can only see one eye at a time.
Again, in any other context, that's a serial killer's house, isn't it?
I know.
It's just, it's, imagine going home to that, because he's a good looking guy. It's just, he's
Matthew McConaughey. He looks like a movie star.
Yeah, he's just, that's a whole other thing. But, and then we find out early in the series, of course, that he has experienced this devastating tragedy, which has, no doubt changed him. And as a result, his eyes are kind of, or he says his eyes are open. He knows who he is, what he stands for. It's, his take on religion is that it's a language virus. He talks about fulfillment and closure as empty jars, like it's constantly monologuing about time being a flat circle and the futility of existence.
Like humanity was an evolutionary mistake that we should all just agree to stop reproducing. He's an anti-natalist. He is a ball to hang out with. He is
a real laugh. He is someone you would seek out at a party, right? He is devoid of hope and happiness and contentment. He seems to just endure living like it's a punishment, really.
Yes.
But he also has that, again, like Longlegs, Agent Harker in Longlegs, he has that feels like almost a supernatural intuition about some aspects of this case. Like he's got a really sharp eye for reading people, which is partly what leads him to be under the microscope in 2012. So, but, are those chemical flashbacks? Is it a sort of a physical thing? Is there something else going on? It kind of... it's a very complex character, and he weirdly comes across as, in a way, the partner that with the most integrity, who seems the most trustworthy, despite the fact that he's like a complete loose cannon who also does just about everything you shouldn't do as a cop, but he also feels like the dependable one.
Yeah, and I think Michelle Monaghan's character, she plays Marty's wife, long-suffering wife, who is smart and knows that she's being lied to, but cannot bring herself to do anything about it. And we'll talk about her in a minute. But I loved this. I went down a rabbit hole about reading old think pieces and essays about this season when it first aired. There was a lot of that. And I love this piece, which was an interview with a philosopher about the philosophy of Rusty Cole in this series. And it was published in Vulture. And he says, he's not at home in the world, expects nothing from it, and has a fundamental mistrust of all discourse of hope. It is also likely that he sees hypocrisy as the norm, much like Marty's, and is attuned to delusion as the natural state of the human mind. This is perhaps why he's so good at soliciting confessions. Because you're right, Rusty throughout the show is a loose cannon, totally kind of wild in the shit that he says, but kind of predictable. He's steady. He's dependable. You know the stuff that he's going to say, even if it is really weird. He says the same kind of weird shit over and over again, pretty much. And he stays true to that. And when we see him sort of in 2002, so that's after they sort of solve the case of Dora Lang and the creepy murders, but they're not fully solved. He is sort of losing it at a point where I think the despair that he feels of being confronted with criminals, with terrible acts of violence, particularly acts of violence against children. I think both of them have this very intense reaction to
visceral,
very visceral. And there's multiple times where they literally kill people in the line of duty that are, in a execution style. And it's usually because they have just witnessed some sort of violence against a child or children, and they're like, I'm gonna enact my law here because I don't want to put you through the legal process and allow the possibility of you being out there. And there's a horrible scene where where Rust is doing an interview with a suspect, and he whispers to her that she should die.
To kill herself if she gets a chance, right?
And it's fucking horrifying.
It is, yeah.
And there's, I find him to be like this really fascinating character because his backstory, as much as it is revealed, is never used as an excuse. Because you can sort of see that Rusty was this way even before.
Yeah, that might have helped it along a little bit. But he wasn't exactly going to be like the all singing, all dancing.
And what do you think of the performances and the chemistry between Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey?
It's such an amazing pairing. Probably, helped no doubt, obviously, by the quality of their performances because they are both seasoned actors, but also the chemistry and the friendships they have in real life.
Yeah, because they're real life buddies.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting that I think in real life, Woody Harrelson is kind of the atheist hippie, and McConaughey is the Christian, right? So their roles are reversed in this show. Not saying Woody Harrelson's a nihilist, but it's fascinating that those are the roles that they were given. Do
you follow much of them kind of as popular culture figures? Like, were you on the McConaissance train?
Yes, I was. Full disclaimer: I fancy them both deeply as well. So I just
you're in the right place. You're in the right house. Yeah, I'm fully obsessed with the whole thing of them. Do you know about the whole thing about how they actually might be biological half-brothers?
No, I don't think I do.
Oh my God, it's an amazing rabbit hole. So they're longtime friends. They've started a bunch of movies together in the 90s. They got this role. I watched all the making of videos. And
Anna, you're an expert on this. This is amazing.
I just have it on Blu-ray and it's a fun rabbit hole to go into. And Woody Harrelson, I believe, was like, oh, this is an amazing job. I get to hang out with my buddy every day. This is great. But also, so... They both tell a story how their families were hanging out. And I believe it was Matthew's mom who said that she knew Woody's dad back in the day. And in this interview, both Matthew and Woody were like,
wink, wink.
She said it in a wink, wink kind of way. She was like, she knew his dad.
I knew him intimately, right?
Yeah. And then they started, I think they've actually pitched this as a show that might actually be filming for a streamer right now.
Watch that.
Where I don't know if this is just like a trip kind of situation where they just go around somewhere nice and they have food and they hang out and we'll just watch it because they're really charismatic and fun dudes to watch.
Yeah.
And kind of nutty in very charming ways. But I think there was this idea where they were like, what if we do a DNA test? What if we actually are brothers? So like same father but different mothers. Brother from Another Mother. I think it's actually the title of the TV show that they're making together.
Christ.
And I think they haven't gone through with it because in a show of unbelievable emotional intelligence, I think, I can't recall who it was, but one of them was like, we're not going to go through with it because for the other one, it would be like too complicated of a wrench to put into his relationship with his father and what that would mean. Would it be like losing a dad instead of gaining another one? So it's like, I love it. I love it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is, and that level of emotional maturity is totally not what we see with Rust. Nope. You would not see that with Rust and Marty. That is, that's incredible. Oh, God, I'd so watch that show.
I'm going to Google it right now.
Yeah. Oh, this is... You'd have to find a way to segue that into your podcast somehow. It's not horror, but...
It is Brother from Another Mother, starring the both of them will be on Apple TV Plus at some point in the near future. It's a fictional series where they try to live together on a Texas ranch. I am so in.
Right, that's yours, and that's you and Mike Munzer set up for a future podcast collaboration together, coloring that. That is incredible. That's the best news I've had for a while.
But yeah, what do you make about the way that their the dynamic between their characters evolves from when we first meet them in 1995 to when they finally finish their case in 2012?
Yeah, it's it's really fascinating to watch their relationship change over time, isn't it? They kind of break apart and come back together. So they're totally at odds in terms of philosophies when they kind of first meet and they judge each other. But there's also like a mutual respect there, or at least I think Marty has a respect for Rusty's work process and sort of his eye for detail, because he could have taken him off that case earlier on, but he kind of vouches for him, doesn't he? Mm-hmm. They kind of tolerate each other in a way, maybe because of their mutual dedication to this case. And as you say, those acts of violence that they have such a visceral reaction to. And then by 2012, their relationship has degraded along with their behaviour, and Marty's sort of estranged from his family, and he's, visibly aging. They're broken apart, find themselves drawn back together by the case and that sense of duty that Rusty says they have towards tying it up. Yeah. And they're so changed physically by the end, especially McConaughey. Like his whole face and his skin looks different. It's sunken, and that he's more erratic than ever. By that point, I feel like their views of the world are challenged, as are their places within it by this case. And we arrive at a place by 2012 where Marty especially seems very broken by everything. And I think apart from the end, the very ending, which we'll talk about, I think what also saves this show from being the most depressing thing ever is that bafflement from Marty towards Rusty, especially in those car scenes when he's just monologuing about life and time and death.
But you're not a Christian, so what do you believe?
I believe that people shouldn't talk about this type of shit at work.
Hold on. 3 months we've been together, I get nothing from you. Today, what we're into now, do me a courtesy, okay? I'm not trying to convert you.
Look, I'd consider myself a realist, all right? But in philosophical terms, I'm what's called a pessimist.
Okay, what's that mean?
It means I'm bad at parties.
Let me tell you, you ain't great outside of parties either.
And I think, by the time you hit episodes sort of 6 and 7, and you've the identity of the killer has kind of taken a back seat for me, and I just want to see what will happen with these two men, and whether they're going to kind of come back together again, whether they're going to kiss and make up.
Well, you know what I love that's really interesting that you sort of mention is that how their roles get a bit reversed.
Yeah, for sure.
Because when we first meet them, and especially on this case, they, Marty gets a promotion out of it. Rusty, I guess, kind of gets left alone, gets her reputation for being like a detective savant of kinds, and their relationship, and I guess their personal lives or their relationship to their work really hits rock bottom in 2002.
For sure.
Rusty quits entirely, sort of dedicates himself to drinking, really, as he says. But he was always the better detective in the previous, in their previous work. He was more dedicated. He was doing the legwork. He was investigating the small details, the leads. But when they kind of come back together in 2012, he's so consumed by his obsession. He's done so much work. He's so in the like Carcosa mindset. He's like, this is Carcosa. This is Carcosa. Like, I feel like Carcosa was the Brat of 2014, where everybody is like, this is Brat. No, this is Brat. And
this is Carcosa.
Yeah, that
so
was Rusty's mentality. And in comes Martin. He's like, okay, I'm going to run this through this database, and then I'm going to go through this other database, and I'm going to pull up records from the IRS from 20 years ago, and boom, he's got suspects. And he's the one who also figures out why the green ears, figures out that it's a paint job, like those little details that have nothing to do with philosophizing or literary allusions or the nature of evil. It's more like good old-fashioned like detective work. And I feel
Marty makes a better private investigator than he does a cop, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, you can't really beat up people at your whim when you're a private investigator, I guess. So there's downsides to that job for him. But I love how their fortes and their weaknesses sort of balance each other out across all across the start and the ending of their stories. It's in the middle where they really clash. And they clash primarily, I think, over Marty's moral hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Because Marty is a serial cheater. That man cannot resist a 25-year-old.
Yeah. No.
Disgusting. And Rusty is like a perennial loner by choice. And enter Maggie, Marty's wife, who's played by Monahan. And their big send-up is because she essentially, and I want to hear what you think about kind of this plot twist and also about her character. She essentially engineers a situation where she has sex with Rusty because she knows that it's the one thing that Marty will not forgive her.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you thought about that scene, about that whole fight scene, what that means for the relationship, and what it like tells us about Maggie as a character.
Yeah, I mean, poor Maggie. She is. Yeah, she's deliberately sidelined in those early episodes because ultimately this is just a show about men, despite pretty much most of the victims being women. And Marty is comfortable and confident with being the man of the house. And he even says early on that he expects his home and everything in it to serve him. So Maggie is the shrew initially. She's the nagging. She tells him off for not being home when he has an important job to do. He's solving crime. She needs to understand that. But when we get to spend time with her later, and when she takes action, uses Rust to get back at Marty to end her marriage, because she can read these men like a fucking book, despite them thinking they know what's up. And she has to find a way out to regain control of her life, I guess. And there's no other way for her to do that than to commit this huge betrayal, within a show that is ultimately about men betraying women every single step of the way. But fucking hell, would she dare to do it to him? And she says in that police interview, doesn't she, something like, I exhausted myself navigating crude men who thought they were clever. So she's had no illusions about her situation and her life and the way that these men are interacting with the world around them at all for the entire time. She's known, and she finally has to find a drastic way to break free and to get out. And at least by 2012, it looks like she has a new marriage and a nice home.
She's doing well.
I do want the best for her. She seems, and she carries herself so differently to her ex-husband now, doesn't she? Like, he is just completely, he's dramatic, he's over the top, he's violent, he shouts, he gestures, he's, everything's a big sort of blow up, he has to get the last word in, and she is sort of quietly controlled. Quietly controlling herself, and because that's what she has to do. And by the end, this is, she has to use a man to get her way out of that marriage, and it's just portrayed as like the biggest betrayal ever for both of them, for Rust and Marty. Like
it is and it isn't, in a sense. Like, I think by the time we get to 2012, Marty has definitely understood that it was very much a desperate act to get out of that marriage, because and as we see the way that he behaves when his girlfriend decides that she doesn't want to sleep with him anymore, he goes absolutely berserker. You can intuit how he would react if his wife decided to leave him and take their children. So I think it's an act of self-preservation. Kind of, she's played these men against each other, and good for her. But I wonder, and she is a really clever, really smart, self-possessed character, but I think she's so bristling at the edges. Like, I feel, and maybe this is just me reading into the one female character who gets a little bit of room in the show. And I think, don't misinterpret me. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing a show about men. Like, if that's what you want to explore, that's what you're interested in, go for it. Yeah. this is a show about men doesn't mean it's for men. Maggie is probably the only female character here who gets any sort of history, any sort of development, but it's almost happening in spite of the show itself. I feel like similarly to other movies that I'm very apologetic of, like the one that comes to mind instantly is Alex Forrest in Fatal Attraction. That character, I think, is incredibly rich in spite of the movie and how the movie treats her. I think it's all because of Glenn Close and how she approached that character. And I think similarly here, I think Maggie is a stronger character because of the performance and because of what we're kind of maybe projecting onto her as female viewers.
Yeah, no, I think, that's a very good point for sure.
But I wonder, kind of on a wider sense, what do you think of the way that True Detective treats its female characters? And maybe more crucially, because they mostly turn up dead, female bodies.
Yeah, well, as you say, it's a man's world. It's a man's job. It's about men who see themselves as heroes who go home and sort of enact their own kind of violence and misogyny against the women in their lives. So the victims in these murders are vulnerable women, and Marty and Rust in particular sort of, supposed to be these, you mentioned, they're not the heroes you'd want. They're supposed to be these masculine heroes, but even Rust, sort of calls Dora Lang like a prost, as, he exploits sex workers for information and for drugs. Marty neglects his wife. He's abusing he psychologically abuses his oldest daughter. He calls his girlfriend a whore as soon as something doesn't go his way. It's a show in which, the women are just trapped in these, all of the women are trapped in these cycles. Yeah, every single one is trapped in some kind of cycle of violence. And I was thinking about some of the parts of this show that actually most disturb me are the way that the women are treated, regarded with disgust in a way that's kind of dressed as pity. There's like that weird moment with Marty and the bag of tampons, which sticks with me because he's so sort of embarrassed and emasculated.
Yeah, he feels very emasculated about it, especially when a young woman hits on him.
When Rust and Maggie hook up, they have this sort of, seem to have this mutual understanding and respect for one another. And it feels like, in another world, this maybe could have gone a different way. But it's when you actually get that moment of them coming together, it's kind of quick and violent and kind of gross. I feel quite saddened by it when I watch it.
Yeah, it was a bad lay.
Yeah, it was a really bad lay. And then you've got Marty's affair with Beth, the literal child he met in 1995. Like,
I think that is the worst thing.
I think that's the worst bit, isn't it? It's absolutely disgusting. And I don't know what it says when the scenes that stick with me aren't the abuse and the murder of women and children, but the kind of everyday misogyny of everyday men.
Well, I wonder if it's giving the show too much credit to say it's deliberate. I kind of feel like it is deliberate. But I will say, and this actually surprised me because I remember the show being more violent than it actually is whenever I watched it. I don't know if you've got the same feeling.
Yeah, there's no blood in it or any, you think.
There's no blood aside from like terrible men are getting their brains blown out.
Yes. But there's the crime scenes. There aren't that many crime scenes.
No, and the most horrific crimes, so those that are like perpetrated against children and a lot of the other the murders of young women are outside of Dora Lang, whose body we see in the very first scene. They're all kind of in crime photos that are not really shown very much. And there's
kind of alluded to, isn't it, in the film as well?
And the snuff movie, you only see the reaction of characters. You never see the thing itself.
Yep.
Which I know was very deliberate by the showrunners. And I think there's this sense of like beauty almost in this weird sort of Southern Gothic eeriness of it all. And again, even the devil traps, which were based on Cajun bird traps. I saw this little making of video with the interview with the artist, and it's interesting that he was like, I don't know why they think it's creepy. I just make stuff that's beautiful. And, you know, he was talking about how it's the context that changes.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So, like, obviously, if you see one of those devil traps in a crime scene, you're like, well, that's some satanic shit right there.
Mm-hmm.
If you see it in a gallery space, you're like, oh, well, you know, that's art.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, context is everything, isn't it?
And, you know, I alluded to it at the start of our chat, but I wanted to hear your views, especially because you're a writer's girl. You're a literary girl. Tell me about where you see the literary influence in the structure of the series, the dialogue. You know, I think it's notable to mention that Nick Pizzolatto, the show creator and the writer, was a novelist before he turned into a screenwriter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think I'd clocked until I'd done reading this time that he was a novelist and a short story writer. And I hadn't realised that True Detective has sort of been first envisioned, I think, by him as a novel in hindsight, which makes sense in hindsight. Yeah, as you say, the way the story is structured, its focus on the inner lives of its characters feels very literary. The serial killer investigation is obviously the plot that drives the story forward, but the real meat and bones feels like it is this exploration of these two men and how they change over time. The use of like multiple interweaving timelines very much feels like a literary device, and I think it can often be easier to follow those sorts of timelines on the page where you have kind of clearly delineated timestamps. And I'm always surprised when rewatching this season of True Detective that I can follow what is happening so easily. Yes. And I think it's because it has such a strong visual language, doesn't it? You get such a clear sense of time and setting and mood. So you have a really strong sense visually of what these men are becoming and, you know, the events that have led up to this moment and how things are kind of, sort of interwoven. I think it's thanks to the visual language that makes sense. The narration and the dialogue too definitely feel like you could be reading a novel. Like Rusty and Marty are both unreliable narrators, and thanks to sort of Marty's obsession with presenting himself in a sort of particular way, and then Rusty's sort of, you know, desire, or they're both of their desire to sort of cover up unsavory things they've done in their past. So that feels like it, very much lends itself as a kind of literary device. And the time that we spend with these men deep in conversation, arguing about life and death and religion and belief, it offers such a big window into their internal lives that I don't think we always see on screen, or at least not as well done as this. So I can see how this was envisioned by Pizzolatto as a book to begin with. But I'm very glad it ended up as a TV show because the visual elements are absolutely insane.
Yeah, and I think, you know, especially with a character like Rusty, like I would struggle to hear him on the page without someone like McConaughey with that very particular drawl, that physicality, the way that he like moves and stands in the world, and the way that he looks, particularly at some characters. He's such contempt for characters like Reverend Tuttle, such contempt for some of the people that he's interrogating. There is something else. Like, I think that the way that we move between the interrogation structure through the flashbacks and the memories and the lies that they're telling Detective Gilbert and Detective Papania when they're being interrogated, like, we get the real story while we're also being fed the bullshit that they're telling the authorities. And that just feels like a purely visual language. Like, that is that definitely intense collaboration between the visual language and the direction and the screenwriting. And I do think it's unfortunate that in the year 2024, both Cary Joji Fukunaga, who's the director of all the episodes, which is quite an unusual feat for a TV show, and Nick Pizzolatto are not two creatives that I'm going to
For sure.
defend in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
But fuck me, did they do a good job in 2014?
Yeah. Undeniable.
Pretty good.
It's pretty fucking spectacular, isn't
Yep.
it?
Yeah. And did you notice kind of any, we've spoken about the literary flourishes, the structure of it all, the language. Did you notice any directorial flourishes, like visual moments that really stuck with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like there's as you say, like having one director for the whole show, very much. I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it does feel like it brings a consistency to the experience that you don't always have when you're watching other shows. But there are so many memorable moments. Some of my favourite kind of shots and memorable moments are from the very opening, that fire on the landscape at dusk, like automatically sets the mood. You say that like the mood and the atmosphere is so rich in this show. You literally get it from that first moment. Like I feel like that sets you into a time and a place and a feeling. Rusty's hallucinatory scenes I really like, in the car, the murmuration in the sky.
Yes.
The moment at Carcosa at the end.
I love that. I think that's probably my favorite moment. I don't know if you did this. I rewound it like 3 times because I was like, I think I'm hearing things. And then it was like, oh no, it's just all the different layers of it, the way they were playing with sound and with silence. It felt so oppressive all of a sudden. All the noise in the background that all the exterior shots had just disappeared once Rusty entered into Carcosa.
Yeah, and it's just
I was
silent.
like, is it just the silence unsettled me? It's like, wait, where are all the cicadas? Where are all the weird cricket noises?
Such a rich background noise, isn't it? And it's suddenly, and obviously that's a very deliberate thing. But there's so much. I'm sure we might get a chance to talk about. There's so much going on in this show that you second guess yourself and you think, have they added something in there? Am I reading something into this? Is there, have I heard something? Have I seen something? And some of it probably is just coincidence, and some of it is, deliberate. But there's just, it's so rich, isn't it, in terms of visual language. A couple of other really memorable moments are that reveal of Reggie Ledoux to kind of Marty and Rust, but at the viewer at the same time. Like you have that slow motion shot of him emerging from the woods in nothing but his pants and his gas mask. It just feels very, very menacing, and it is that first reveal for everyone at the same time.
Yeah, it's how I come out of the shower every day.
Yeah.
My trusty gas mask.
In your trusty gas mask, in your white pants.
Yeah, totally. It's my special white pants.
And a special white pants.
My special gas mask. My special white pants.
Oh, beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
I agree though. That's one creepy shot.
Isn't it?
And obviously, it's also because it's the weird, the greenery, it's such a, this sounds very basic, it's such a green show. There's so much
emerging from the woods.
Yeah, but they're just like richness of nature. And obviously, everybody talks about the tracking shot in episode 4.
Oh, fuck yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's like, calm down. What a show off.
It's just mind-blowing. It is.
So good.
Wild.
Though.
You're suddenly immersed in like this utter chaos. It's such a juxtaposition to some of the the brooding tone of the show to that point. It feels like you're in a completely different show for a moment. And yeah, I think that's only I don't know, the only other sort of tracking shot like that's really struck me before was in Haunting of Hill House, Mike Flanagan's the kind of hold my beer 17-minute continuous shot with the bent neck lady. Like, those two are it's just mind blowing, isn't it? I don't know how many times it takes to shoot something like that. It must be fucking wild.
Apparently, they only had a day and a half with Matthew McConaughey, so they had to shoot it all in a day and a half.
Oh, well, he's a pro, isn't he? I'm sure he was just like, well, if you guys can keep up with me, then
I guess that's how he got Bond.
Yeah.
I'm sure it wasn't that easy, but
No.
And we've alluded to the mystery, the Carcosa of it all, the Yellow King, all the Lovecraftian Ambrose Bierce, the Robert Chambers, all this like literary goodness.
There's so much.
Just like this fucking giant trifle of literary references and pessimistic philosophy and just all this shit is like in this dense serial killer shortbread.
A big grey misery soup.
Philosophy. Like a goulash of nasty antinatalist pessimism and Lovecraftian nonsense.
These all make really good like metal band names, by the way. This is just,
Does all this auspicious build-up deliver in the end when we finally meet the Yellow King, when we finally meet Errol Childress, the killer, when we finally discover what all of it was about?
I feel like my notes here are basically just questions. So it kind of, it does and it doesn't. I think Errol's a really interesting reveal because for some ways, for me, he doesn't match the build-up. Despite his sort of large stature and the really physical aspects of his sort of, physically he's large, but his sort of they've spent so long talking about this heavily scarred man, this, spaghetti monster with the green ears, this sort of huge monstrosity you have in your face. He kind of doesn't, he doesn't have green ears. The scarring that is emphasized doesn't feel that prominent. So there's kind of, for me, the sort of the myth of the fairy tale seems sort of scarier than the reality. He is intimidating, the way he stares at that kid and the way that he swaps accents. It's just, but he kind of, dare I say it, feels like a run-of-the-mill paedophile serial killer in lots of ways.
I'm glad you say that. Yeah.
So that's kind of a, it's not that it's not a payoff, but I guess that's kind of, you get this huge build up and you're like, this guy, sure. So if you're looking for a kind of big shock reveal or this monster of sort of supernatural significance or even any justice against the most powerful figures in society, you kind of, it could be disappointing, but I think it's the right end. We get some of the answers, but not all. We get we might know what the Yellow King is. It's not confirmed 100%. It feels like it, is it some deity, this sort of yellow skeletal figure in Carcosa? Is it Errol? Carcosa may or may not be. I mean, it might be that man-made sort of labyrinth at the end. Maybe it isn't. But the ending itself with the showdown and those final scenes with Rust and Marty do feel right for me because the killer they track down is a monster, yes, but is he a big player? Is there some grander pyramid scheme at work here? Was he at the bottom? Was he doing someone else's bidding? It kind of feels like there's no big catharsis for the case because there's no real ends to the cycle of violence. That Errol is, for me, probably part of a much bigger wheel, and he might be gone, but the living victims that we meet are still damaged. Those victims are still dead. Betty is still the product of this horrible incest that kind of sticks with me. So but Rust and Marty were never going to be able to bust that huge, large, massive conspiracy wide open, were they? Like, what else could have happened? This show has been telling us for 8 episodes that time is cyclical and that the battle for light and darkness will go on. So it kind of, it makes sense. And does it even matter that we don't get solid answers? I think I'm just left with so many questions, but it does feel right. Is there a larger conspiracy at work? Does Rust have this window into a greater understanding of the universe that's shared by someone like Errol, or is he just a very damaged human? How much of their reading of the entire case is sort of influenced by context like the Satanic Panic. Like there's just, you know, or is Errol's capture part of a devil's plan altogether? It just, for me, it delivers, and the build up does deliver, but in a, I guess maybe not in a way that you might sometimes expect from a serial killer procedural show or movie. Does that make sense? That was a very big, that was lots of questions.
Lots of questions, and it's really interesting to hear, because I had a kind of like slightly different experience watching it this time. So maybe it's slightly informed by the fact that I've been watching a lot of these movies from, you know, the start of cinema to through TV, and the most satisfying endings for me are the ones that remind us that the killer is not the special one. And I think that True Detective spends so much time building up this mythology of Carcosa and the Yellow King. And when we land on it, when we meet Errol Childress, and we see where he lives, who he is, the illusions of him having been a victim as well.
For sure. He says something, doesn't he, about, I'm going to do what...
I'm going to show you what they did to me.
What they did to me. And it's like, this guy is another victim of those same cycles. Something happened to him, and then he is inflicting that on his half-sister and the people around him. And he is kind of he cuts a bit of a pathetic figure, really, doesn't he?
Totally. And also the decay and the filth of the Childress's house, the absolute kind of wildness in which they exist. And it's not a kingdom. It's not magic. It's not Satan. It's quite pedestrian. It's like you said, it's it's a good old fashioned like pedophilia ring, you know?
Yeah.
It's not nice at all. It's fucking terrible. But it's not special.
Yeah.
In the sense that like all this great buildup, all this great philosophy, it is kind of pointless, I find. Yeah. And what I found really interesting diving into a little bit of the thinking about the show and that ending at that time is that a lot of people were, you know, doing pieces like, oh, this is the face of evil. And I'm like, it didn't feel like that.
No.
Because it just feels like the evil is in the environment as opposed to in this one guy. And what was really interesting is that actually I did feel very much this time around. I remember the first time I watched it, I had similar questions to you. And then maybe informed by other things, this time around I was like, oh no, this is purely psychological. There's no supernatural here.
Yeah, you don't read any like supernatural element.
No supernatural at all. And I'll tell you why. It's because of the whole like atmosphere, how oppressive it is, how rooted in like inescapable poverty it all is, how oppressive that is, how like Childress struck me. I mean, he's not sympathetic, but the way that he was being built up as like a monster or a creature, you know, and then you meet him and it's like, oh, this is not some supernatural king. He's not, you know, bestowed with particularly evil powers or anything kind of superhuman. He's just a man who does not give a shit about human life. And there is such disregard for human life across the board in every single environment that we meet in this world, including places of faith. You know, there's the two reverend figures, Reverend Tuttle, who's like this really powerful preacher who's sort of very clearly involved, but not at the head of this whole abusive ring. There's the Reverend who is a preacher and ends up kind of consumed in alcohol and has kind of abandoned the church, and the church has abandoned him because he couldn't comprehend that those abuses of power and the thing that he believed in so deeply could coexist under the same roof. So like there's such darkness all around, and it's not just the one guy. It's everyone.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, them sort of solving that case was more about this, solving the entire case. Not just the one murder, but all of these unsolved misattributed disappearances, these murders. The little girl that is killed on the video that Rusty finds that kind of reoccurs, especially after they come together again in 2012. You know, this is someone who wasn't even considered a missing person. Everybody was like, oh yeah, she just went off with her father. Who cares? Who gives a shit? It's about finding some sort of care in an uncaring world. And Childress really is the least scary thing about True Detective for me. He's just a dude.
The only power he really has is like his physical stature and his family name, which might protect him to a point. But he does feel bottom of the food chain in all respects, doesn't he? He is. Yes. I totally see what you mean. It kind of just and for me, just like landing on an answer, or ultimately an answer for what all of it means, or what has happened, or what's real. What kind of doesn't really matter, because that sense of sort of futility and nihilism is still there, and it's still kind of. For me, the whole thing is supernatural or not, real or not. Well, the reality is that this kind of battle between dark and light will go on, and there is no save. You know, there's saving one case, but there isn't saving everyone. There isn't saving everything, and it's only that tiny spark of hope from Rust right at the end of all people that makes you go, oh, thank fuck for that. There's something to hold on to there. Because otherwise it does feel very bleak indeed, doesn't it?
Do you know what? Instead of maybe chasing after a serial killer for 12 years, maybe some therapy?
Yeah.
Maybe
Do you think?
Yoga. I don't know.
Maybe... if he likes meditation, we should recommend yoga. For sure.
I think there's other options, you know?
Yeah, I think there might be. I think,
it's
cooking, walking.
But, you know, getting a dog is nice. Maybe get a dog.
That's very nice. Would recommend. Yeah.
Instead of getting a secret storage unit where you harbor a snuff tape and insane drawings of and a map of serial killings.
I mean, it is no wonder he's being looked at by the other cops, right? He goes so deep into this that he becomes totally fucking suspect.
I mean, maybe don't start drinking at 10 a.m., buddy.
No.
Genuinely not a good idea.
I do like his dedication to the drink, where he's like, I'm quitting my job and I'm taking up alcoholism.
On Thursdays I drink.
On Thursdays I drink. I'm going to drink in this, interview room because you're breaking this is my day off.
Did you, and this might be, casting your mind back to 2014, did you at any point think that Rust might be the killer? When the show started pointing us in that direction?
That is hard to remember. I feel like that... I feel like I probably didn't, but only because I possibly thought the show was trying to lure me into that direction. Yeah. Does that women? You're like, no, you're double bluffing me here.
Yeah, I felt the same.
Yeah, it would be disappointing if he turned out. It'd be like, oh yeah, really. But as you say, the reveal with the things being a disappointment, that reveal with because of course you have to have a twist. So we had seen Errol before, right? We had come across him before. Russ had come across him before, and even that feels like a bit of a letdown in that it's not this like big shock kind of, oh my God, yeah, I spot. It's kind of like, oh yeah, because we couldn't see that side of his face and because he had facial hair, you wouldn't have spotted it with a close reading of the show, really. I don't think he was that easy to pick out because the physical characteristics are sort of deliberately obscured. So even that feels like it's a twist, but it's like right, right, it was that guy. Yeah, well, we wouldn't have known because it kind of adds into that sense of it all just being like it's not big, it's not clever. Yeah, it's just it is what it is, and they didn't see him just because he had a beard and his he was looking into the sun and you just couldn't see it.
And also, I like the disappointment, the profound disappointment that Rusty feels. 'Cause he sort of prides himself on sort of seeing someone.
I can see everything. I can read everything.
I can read someone's guilt on their face. And
within like, what did he say? Within a few minutes, I can tell whether someone's guilty or not. Like,
and he meets Errol in the 3rd episode. And then when he finally meets him again in the final episode, one of the things that he, after, he's stabbed multiple times and almost dies, he's like, I fucking saw him and I didn't recognize him. I think that's the loss of, that's the biggest disappointment for him, is that I had him and I did not see him. His abilities were not as sharp as he thought them to be.
Yeah, and absolutely.
Before we start wrapping up, Steph, we're having a nice time. Do you really want to talk about the philosophy of True Detective?
Oh, God, Jesus fucking Christ. This is like, there are whole essays out there about this, especially, I feel like I'm back at uni where I took a module in philosophy in my first year and I flunked it. Like, this is not my fucking rodeo, man. But
listen.
No, but absolutely.
Time is a flat circle. We can move on. That's it. That's all we need to know.
This is a world where nothing is solved. When someone once told me time is a flat circle. Everything we've ever done or will do, we're gonna do over and over and over again. And that little boy and that little girl, they're gonna be in that room again. And again. And again.
We have discussed the philosophy of it, and that I think Russ says at one point that, like, my life has been a circle of degradation and violence, and I feel like that's basically it's sexy, and it just it kind of sums the whole show up, really, doesn't it? It's that's kind of it. It's the key for me is that, it interrogates those cycles of abuse, and that every character is involved in or experiences that abuse in some way. What really lifts that sense of futility and that sense of pessimism and antinatalism and all of those interesting philosophical debates that you can look up and read online on Wikipedia like me and go, oh my God. Oh, things are just getting worse over time, are they? Oh, we're all just free will is non-existent. My God. What really lifts it is that moment of like pure transformation that Rust experiences whilst unconscious, and that he feels his daughter and his father, and he sort of understands their love, and that like radically changes his worldview. So there's this tiny window of light there that, I don't know, the darkness continues, but there will always be light to counter it.
And also, he's got his buddy Marty. Their friendship is stronger than ever. I mean, moving in together, the Odd Couple New Orleans edition. When love it.
I can't wait. Yeah.
In all seriousness, though, the performance of Matthew McConaughey in that moment where he's has this breakdown and he talks about what he's seen, and his entire his shoulders just sort of feel lighter all of a sudden, and the way that Marty consoles him in the only way he can, by calling him a dickhead.
Yeah. It's love. It
is love.
They've got each other, and they have had each other's backs, they don't they won't want to admit to it, but
and I think it's hugely telling and really important, and I love a bit of symmetry when they both get almost killed by Childress in the final confrontation scene, and they both save each other, at different points. None of them would be alive without the other, so they're each other's soulmates.
They are. Oh my God, this is actually a Southern Gothic romance.
It is. It doesn't end the same way as Hannibal does, but you can't have everything.
You can't have everything, but there's room for fan fiction there.
Oh, I don't want to go into that Reddit board. I think that's too dark even for me.
I'm going to give a dramatic reading next of.
We'll save that for the Patreon. If you want a dramatic reading of some True Detective saucy fanfic, then you know where to go.
Flourish of subscribers now who are like, yes, been dying to hear this horny, rusty fanfic.
Rusty fanfic. It works on 2 levels.
It does, right? I
know. Steph, before we wrap up, do you see the influence of True Detective season 1 specifically anywhere else on TV or serial killer movies?
Yeah, I do. You know, I think this was a key player in sort of changing or influencing sort of the landscape of TV, and that really contributed towards that boom in the concept of the miniseries and that the approach to the storytelling and the sort of the caliber of the actors involved, and the sort of cinematography and the direction. And I wonder whether I don't know, do you think it would have had an impact on the concept of the sort of the anthology series too? Because I know we'd had American Horror Story, but we've had shows like Castle Rock and Them and The Sinner, which I feel like could have had influence from here. And I do think we've been trying to recapture, like Seven and like Silence of the Lambs, this is a moment that everyone has been trying to recapture since, especially with the subsequent seasons, and with shows like Mayor of Easttown, Sharp Objects, The Outsider, Mindhunter. They're all kind of noir murder mysteries of some kind, aren't they? And I think I can definitely see elements of those having been influenced by True Detective.
I can definitely see its influence on kind of subsequent limited TV series, particularly kind of crime-based ones.
Yeah.
Sharp Objects, I think, is a show that really has that same atmosphere, really oppressive,
definitely.
Southern Gothic. I wonder, and I really do think that this show was envisioned as a standalone thing.
It was a one and done, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it must have been. And, you could argue, to give Pizzolatto some credit, that the quick turnaround of seasons 2 and 3 did not do him any favors, because this feels obsessed over. And, it feels like it has been bled over and thought over and over and over and over again. So by the time it hit the screens, by the time it was in script stage, and I know that he kind of rewrote parts of the script once Harrelson and McConaughey were cast to sort of adapt it to them.
And he was the sole writer, right?
He was, yeah.
He was the sole writer. Was he the sole writer on the other seasons that he was? He wasn't, was he?
I think he was still the showrunner, so he was kind of the ultimate creative voice in there. I'm not entirely sure whether he wrote every single episode.
He probably didn't have the same level of...
He said as much in interviews that he really is a person, as a writer, he's a writer who needs to be in control and who needs to have his creative vision be the guiding light. I think that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
There's different kinds of writers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, fair enough, dude. Yeah,
it worked here, didn't it?
It's fine to know who you are as a creative, especially as a writer. And it's when you're trying to pretend that you're something you're not is when people run into conflicts.
For sure.
But I can definitely see it kind of in subsequent TV, particularly crime shows, more so than horror shows. But my God, was it lightning in a bottle? What an amazing piece of television.
I have been trying to, every time I watch a show, even if it's good, you recommended Under the Bridge to me, which I really enjoyed as well. But I know there's always that little bit of True Detective kind of in the background that I'm like, oh, I wonder if it will be that good. It is so nice to be able to go back to, I can't believe it's been 10 years because nothing about this feels like, I don't know, it doesn't feel 10 years old to me.
It really doesn't.
And it still has, packs absolutely the same punch that it did back then, which has just been such a joy.
Steph, before we say goodbye, oh God, that feels very pessimistic. Before we wrap up.
Wrap up. For another day. Yeah.
Before we wrap up.
Say goodbye.
Is there anything about True Detective that you wanted to mention that we haven't covered?
Well, what I wanted to hear you wax lyrical about place and Louisiana, and we talked a little bit about the setting and the landscape, but I definitely, it sounded like you are like all about the Southern Gothic feel. So there's just so much to take out of that, isn't there? And how it mirrors the story and the journey of the characters. I just want to hear you talk about how much you love it for a moment.
I fucking love Louisiana. On the page, on the screen. I love, you're like Wise Blood, you're Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, True Blood, all of that. Oh my God, I love True Blood, yeah. Just lap it up. But I think what I really like about True Detective, I don't know if you felt this way. It wasn't because of the heat wave. I felt sweaty watching it. Yes. I felt sweaty in my soul. And it's got like this air, like when you...
It's dirty. Like it's not dirty, but just like, I feel very dusty. Sweaty and dusty, rusty and dusty.
There's this thing that I remember even to this day, even though when I went to New Orleans, it was almost 10 years ago now. And I remember setting foot there and being like, whoa, I've never breathed air like this, in the sense that it was thick. Muggy, it was thick with heat. It was like 3 steps beyond muggy. It was like thick with heat, and so, sounds a bit pretentious, but it was like so heavy with layers of history. And I know, I live in London. It's obviously a very huge historical city. Lots of things have happened here, but there was something quite otherworldly about visiting Louisiana that I've never felt anywhere else, that I think True Detective really manages to somehow compress and really visualize into the screen. And it's the combination of the script, how dense it is, high density, as you were talking, the particular performances that they're giving, the direction. Like, it's in those scenes where we see these big, open, vast, empty spaces with like burned down church in one corner and like a dude in his underpants and a gas mask in another. And I was like, it's not the one track, it's not the oneers that I'm impressed by, it's by that. It's like, how do you make me feel like I've just like been like accidentally peeped on by Satan? That's what I want to try to encapsulate.
And I think part of it, or that feeling, is the way that the natural land sort of bleeds into and kind of combines with the man-made aspects of the landscape. Like the meth lab in the bayou and the Errol's house. They're sort of decomposing into the landscape, aren't they? And they sort of all kind of bleeds into and combines with the horrors being committed. Like Dora Lang's body is decorated with twigs and antlers, and it just really... It's that feeling of like evil and degradation in the show sort of infecting everything. Like everything's got a darkness to it, and it kind of speaks to that sort of nature and folklore, esotericism, natural magic, sort of, again, back to sort of cosmic horror and Louisiana. And I think cosmic horror's got quite a like tie to Louisiana through sort of cultural traditions and things, and Lovecraft. It all just kind of melds together, doesn't it? It sort of melts and kind of, you're right. It's just like the atmosphere of it, and feels quite oppressive. And also it talks about I'd made a note that the town of Erath, which is real, which I didn't realise is real, was obviously hugely impacted by Hurricane Katrina. And I think they reference the hurricane a few times, don't they? And the sort of the damage and the flooding. So it's like a place where the most vulnerable people in society feel even more exposed, and those who are struggling are sort of quite ripe for exploitation, which is where, sort of religion and cults and everyday men kind of come in. I really enjoyed thinking about the landscape and the setting of this show. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that, because it's just one of the standout aspects of it, isn't it?
It's just, it's the thing I have to say I enjoyed the most out of the rewatch. Like, being as oppressive and kind of intense as it felt, I really loved going back to that world and living in it for 8 hours.
Yeah.
And for it being so consistent, even across 3 timelines.
Definitely.
Even in enclosed spaces, you know?
Like you say, lightning in a bottle.
Steph, this has been a joy.
Oh, thank you so much, Anna. I feel I was going to say I feel cleaned, but I actually feel a bit dirty. But I feel like maybe I've been baptized in the waters of True Detective and I emerge.
Do you feel optimistic?
A better person. Do I feel optimistic? I feel like my brain has had a bloody good workout, which has been... That's been nice, hasn't it? Yeah. I've done some reading. I've thought philosophically. There's a little glimmer of hope there.
That's what Rusty would have wanted.
It is. I've had a bloody good time, you know, even if I shouldn't have. It's been a blast.
Steph, where can people find more of your work online?
So you can find me on social media at Steph X McKenna. I produce a Stephen King zine called Outsider, which you can find on socials by looking up outsider_zine. And also you can catch me on other podcasts. I'm a regular contributor to Fresh Blood on Evolution of Horror, where I get to watch lots of films and give my opinions, so that's a lot of fun as well. So hopefully I'll catch some people over there too. And that was my dog barking in the background, so he says
a second special guest.
Yes, that's Rowdy and Rusty coming to the rescue there.
If your dog was named Rusty, I would have absolutely lost my shit right now.
Jesus. Oh, he's a cowboy of sorts. So maybe I'll give him, I'm gonna have to get another dog now.
Maybe if I get 2 cats, I'm gonna have to name them Marty and Rusty, because apparently
they are such good cat names.
Yeah, because I really wanted to name them Olivia Benson and Elliot Stabler, but I discovered apparently Taylor Swift's cat is called Olivia Benson, so I can't do that now.
Oh, she's ruined. Oh, no. You can't piggyback on the back.
No, I
think Marty and Rusty's like...
Good cat names, right?
Yeah. Just don't name the third one Errol and you'll be fine.
No.